والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد, we have returned after quite a break. We had about 3 weeks break there between Eid, and I was also out for a while. Alhamdulillah, we've returned. We are dealing with chapters that all share a commonality. These chapters seem arbitrary for the untrained eye from Zadul-Ma'ad. As a matter of fact, every book written by man has pros and has cons, has pros and has shortcomings, things that could have been better, could have been done better, right? It is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's book that is perfect. It could not be perfected more, right? And Zadul-Ma'ad, one of the points that some of the scholars have made with regards to Zadul-Ma'ad, that this book could have been done better, is the order of the chapters. They seem arbitrary. He'll discuss one thing, and then he'll discuss the rest of that thing many, many pages later. And it seems, because honestly, that is how he wrote it. He wrote it from his memory as he was traveling. And he said in the introduction, I'm writing this book away from my library and traveling. My thoughts are scattered and my books are not with me, right? So he wrote it as it came to mind. So some scholars have actually taken this book, Zadul-Ma'ad, and they've reorganized it. They've put all the chapters together like you would find in a book of fiqh, right? That's interesting. But always, we like to have the original that the scholar wrote, right? We want to have the original work. It's good to have, abridged versions. It's good to have versions that have been worked on and pined over by other scholars. But at the end of the day, we do want to always have the original work of the scholar at hand, because that is invaluable, really. These chapters that we are dealing with, they seem arbitrary. They seem random. But they're not. Because Ibn Al-Qayyim, rahimahullah, he introduced these chapters after we finished Hajj, right? The 5 pillars of Islam. He introduced to us chapters he introduced these chapters with a chapter regarding the tongue and the etiquettes of the tongue and speech. We've discussed the principles of those etiquettes in detail. He started it out really by discussing names and how names have an effect on the mind and have an effect on the thing that has been named, right? How even people, their own name will have an effect on their destiny and have an effect on who they identify themselves as. But all of these chapters now, we've discussed in the previous chapters, we've discussed how he used to make dhikr, the Prophet ﷺ. What he used to say when he would enter his home, what he would say for adhan and iqamah and after salah and during Eid. Now, we're going into the etiquettes of what he would say and how he would conduct himself in the presence of food. How he would eat, what he would say before he eats, after he eats, etc. So these seem like arbitrary chapters, but really they are all connected and they are all tied together by one overarching theme, and that is etiquettes of the tongue, etiquettes of speech. I can't express enough how pivotal speech is in our lives. We live in a world currently that is overflowing with speech, with idle talk, right? Overflowing with laghu. Laghu. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, describing the believers, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ. He describes the people of Al-Firdaus, the highest levels of paradise. One of their traits is that they turn away from laghu. So what is a laghu? A laghu in the Arabic language literally translates to Twitter. I'm not joking. That's really the literal translation of the word laghu. What is Twitter? Twitter is the sound of birds, right? A laghu in the Arabic language is the sound of birds that is unintelligible. It just fills the atmosphere. We don't really know what they're saying, right? That's what a laghu is. If you look it up in the dictionary, it'll say Twitter, right? Which kind of is ironic. But the point is that we live in a world that is overflowing, just busting at the seams with excessive talk, excessive actions. Laghu. It's overflowing with laghu. People complain all the time. I don't have time to do this. I don't have enough time to, learn the Quran. I don't have enough time to do this and that. We have plenty of time. We have more time than we would know what to do with it. But we are so preoccupied with a laghu, distraction, that we are under this, we have this belief that we have no time, when really we have more time allotted to us than probably any other time in human history. I mean, just a vehicle or an airplane saves months of travel, right? People wanted to travel. We take the trip in 1 hour. It used to take 3, 4, 5 days to get there, right? One way. So we have, a person wants to bathe. You had to go to a well and draw water and heat the water up and bathe. Now you just turn the faucet and there you go. Hot water coming down on you. You don't even have to pour it on yourself, right? People wanted to cook. They had to make fire and they had to set it up and get firewood and chop wood and all these things. Now you just turn the gas on. We have more time than we know what to do with. But unfortunately, our time has been filled with a laghu. Because we live in a time of so much speech, so much talking, we start to think that our words are meaningless. Our words don't have the effects that they have. Words are very powerful. The way that you use them may completely change the perspective of a person listening, for good or for bad, for positive or negative. When you speak, when I speak, and the more influential a person is, the more important it becomes for them to be wary of their words. Every time you articulate something to another human being, you are essentially changing the way that they look at the world. They're never going to be the same after whatever you've said to them. Even if it's something trivial, it has an effect. It has an effect. When somebody is listening, it will have an effect. And so we are taught in the Quran and the Sunnah to be very wary of our words. The Prophet ﷺ teaches us that we are to either speak and earn merit, or we are to remain silent and escape punishment. Right? We are to either speak and earn merit, right? إما أن يتكلم فيغنم أو يسكت فيسلم. هكذا يقول صلى الله عليه وسلم. A person is to either speak and gain merit, or they are to remain silent and remain safe, remain in safety. And it's interesting because it's almost impossible to be too quiet. We should always speak less than necessary, right? Because the tongue is a monster. It can become a monster. It is a caged beast that is constantly straining to break out of its cage and run wild and cause you grief. So we have to be very wary of our speech. A person who is naturally quiet naturally earns more respect than a person who speaks more than necessary. The scholars tell us, and some of the wise men of Islamic scholarship say, that we should remain silent as much as possible. Because silence is an adornment for the intelligent, and it is a cover for the fool. Meaning a person who is intelligent, if they are silent, the less they speak, the more they become beautiful in our eyes, and the more what they say becomes valuable. And a person who is a fool, if he doesn't speak, it's a cover. No one will know a person is a fool until he opens his mouth and tells us. So it's a win-win for a person to say less than necessary. The Prophet ﷺ was asked, as is in Jami' al-Tirmidhi, what are the things that people go to hell for most? He said, al-famu wal-farju. He said, the mouth and the private parts. These are the two things that lead people to hell most. Now, when we say the mouth and the private parts, we want to imagine that these are really two categories of sin. One being a category of vengeance, and the other being a category of desire and passion. These two things will lead a person to hell. The Prophet ﷺ also said, مَنْ يَضْمَنْ لِي مَا بَيْنَ لَحْيَيْهِ وَمَا بَيْنَ رِجْلَيْهِ أَضْمَنْ لَهُ الْجَنَّةِ. He says, whoever guarantees to me that he will protect and preserve what is between his two jaws and between his two legs, I will guarantee for this person paradise. So this is paramount for us to dwell on speech. Speech is very important. How you use words has an effect. The words that you choose to use, the emphasis that you place on them. All of this is very important. We've discussed in previous chapters how a person can overuse words and cause them to lose value. A person overuses words, it causes them to lose value. What makes diamonds precious and valuable? Obviously, their rarity. Likewise, gold and silver. These things are rare. And because they're rare, they're valuable. Pearls are rare. And they have a very particular way that they come about, and you can only bring them about in that way. And so they become very valuable because of their rarity. However, if a person were to have, if the world were to have too many diamonds, they would no longer be valuable because they are common. Likewise is the issue with words. We can overuse words. We can overuse words, and in doing so, we cause them to lose value. Words such as sorry or I apologize. How overused are these words? Right? If they burn your house down or if they accidentally bump into you in the street, it's the same word. Sorry. Right? Sorry I burned your house down, sorry I bumped into you. Right? And in our very superficial society, that's what we do. Oh, sorry. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. This kind of fake presentation of humility, right? Sorry has no meaning now. It has no value. Doesn't mean anything. Likewise, the word love. I love this. I love that. I hate this. I hate that. I hate this movie, and I hate, and I hate death. It's like there's no contrast with those words. And so we're using the same words to express very different levels and intensities. Those words start to lose value. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ warned us about overusing words. Right? Overusing words, number one. And number two, using words in the wrong way. Using something good to describe someone terrible. So he said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he prohibited that a hypocrite be referred to as a sayyid, as a person who is an upstanding person. Sayyid is like sir, He prohibited that word be used to describe a hypocrite. Why? Because if we use that word to describe good people and bad people, the word has no meaning anymore. Let's take a look at the word sheikh. What does sheikh mean now? Everybody is a sheikh, right? If you have some remnants of a beard and you talk a little bit, you're a sheikh. Sheikh. Imam has no meaning. Everybody is imam. If you studied for 40 years, you're sheikh, and if you studied for 4 days, you're sheikh. So the words have no meaning anymore. What about the word ustad? Ustad. We hear this word a lot, right? Ustad, ustad. In the books of history, where we research the people that are in the chains of narration, kutub al-rijal, very, very rarely will you find a scholar being described as an ustad. It's almost unheard of. One who was described as an ustad was Ibn Khuzaymah, rahimahullah, the great muhaddith. Ibn Khuzaymah was described as an ustad, and that was like a crown on his head. Why? Because traditionally among scholars, the word ustad is only used to describe a person who has perfected at least 12 different disciplines in Islamic sciences. Hadith and tafsir and lugha and on and on and on. If a person has not perfected at least 12, then this person is not referred to as an ustad. Likewise, the word hafiz. Hafiz was only traditionally used by the scholars to describe someone who, at the bare minimum, memorized 100,000 narrations. That is the bare minimum. If a person has not memorized 100,000 narrations, committed them to memory by heart, then this person is not considered a hafiz. Now the word hafiz is, thrown around for everybody. So we see how words can lose their value. And if these words are then used to describe bad things will find their way into our lives. The Prophet ﷺ mentions, the narration collected by Ibn Majah on the authority of Abis al-Ghifari, he says, لَيَسْتَحِلَّنَّ طَائِفَةٌ مِّنْ أُمَّةِ الْخَمْرَ يُسَمُّونَهَا بِغَيْرِ اسْمِهَا. He said, a group from my nation will eventually come to make alcohol permissible, intoxicants permissible. They will do so by naming it by other than its rightful name. Right? So we use a good name to describe something bad. That is the first original trick of a shaitan in using words. A shaitan, when he was seducing Adam alayhi salam and Hawa to eat from the forbidden tree, he described this tree with its opposite descriptions. He said, هَلْ أَدُلُّكَ عَلَى شَجَرَةِ الْخُلْدِ وَمُلْكٍ لَا يَبْلَى. He described that tree that Adam was prohibited to eat from. He described it as the tree of eternity, the eternal tree, and a dominion that will never perish. Right? It's exactly the opposite. Because when they ate from that tree, their dominion perished and they were subject to death. It's exactly the opposite. This is the trickery of a shaitan. We have to watch out for how we use our words. Allah has stressed this in the Quran. He's been very precise with his words, and the Prophet ﷺ throughout his life, very precise with his words, used his words very judiciously. Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala says, Faslun, this is another subchapter. He says, وَكَانَ يعني النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا وضع يده في الطعام قال بسم الله وأمر بذلك ويقول إن نسي بسم الله في أوله وآخره. قال ابن القيم حديث صحيح. والصحيح وجوب التسمية عند الأكل وتاركها شريكه الشيطان في طعامه وشرابه. وأحاديث الأمر بها صحيحة صريحة ولا معارض لها ولا إجماع يسوغ مخالفتها. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he says, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, whenever he would go to eat, when he would first place his hand in his meal or address his meal, he would begin with Bismillah. He would say Bismillah. Not Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Just Bismillah. Right? And he commanded others to do the same. And if he would have forgotten to say Bismillah, he would say Bismillahi fi awwalihi wa akhirihi, which literally translates to, I eat in the name of Allah at its beginning and end. Right? So, if a person goes to eat, they begin with Bismillah. If they forget, they say Bismillah awwalahu wa akhirahu, aw fi awwalihi wa akhirihi, based on if they remember. This is graded as an authentic narration by Ibn Al-Qayyim. It's been reported by Imam al-Tirmidhi on the authority of Aisha. Yes? Start with what? I don't understand the question. Surah Al-Hadid. Well, I mean, that's a topic for tafsir. I mean, it's kind of off topic. Ala kulli hal, so the Prophet ﷺ would always start with Bismillah, and if he'd forget, Bismillah fi awwalihi wa akhirih. He says, and the correct opinion of scholars is that saying Bismillah when a person goes to eat is obligatory. As-sahih, wujub at-tasmiyah 'inda al-akl, meaning it is binding, it is obligatory upon a person to say Bismillah. He says, and the correct opinion is that a person who purposely does not say Bismillah, then a shaitan is his companion in that food and drink that he is having. He says, and the narrations that have been mentioned and collected of the Prophet ﷺ commanding others to say Bismillah when they eat, they are all authentic and they are all very clear. They're not ambiguous. He said, and there's nothing authentic which contradicts that command. And there is no consensus amongst the scholarship of Islam that dictates that it is not obligatory to say Bismillah. So Ibn Al-Qayyim here, he's discussing with us the issue that some people, some of the scholars of Islam, have viewed saying Bismillah as being a sunnah, as being something encouraged. He's saying that is a weak opinion. The correct opinion is that it is obligatory. This is also the opinion of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, and that is that a person who does not say Bismillah when they go to eat purposely, this is a person who is in imitation of a shaitan. And he says the least case scenario of imitating a shaitan purposely is that it is haram. This is the reasoning of Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah ta'ala. قال وهل تزول مشاركة الشيطان بتسمية أحد الجماعة؟ فنص الشافعي على إجزاء تسمية الواحد، وقد يقال لا ترتفع مشاركة الشيطان للآكل إلا بتسميته هو. He brings up a very important issue here. Is it sufficient for one person in a group of people to say Bismillah on behalf of everyone else when they go to eat together? So, we're sitting together, there's a few of us, and is it enough for just one of us to say Bismillah, or do we each individually have to say Bismillah? It's a difference of opinion, although he does mention that Ash-Shafi'i rahimahullah mentions that it is permissible and it is acceptable for just one person to say Bismillah amongst the group. He said, and it could be argued that a person who does not say Bismillah, even if someone else in the group said Bismillah, they are still in error of imitating a shaitan. Because a shaitan, when he goes to eat, he is described to us as someone who eats with his left hand, who does not say Bismillah. And so, if I'm sitting in a group and one of us says Bismillah, that may be sufficient for the barakah. However, me not saying Bismillah does not, because one person said it, and that is not enough for everybody to be outside of the realm of imitating a shaitan, or a shaitan joining a person in his meal. This is an interesting topic, and what is clear is that each person is commanded to say Bismillah individually, though the opinion of a Shafi'i is very strong, and I won't get into why that is. However, it's not easily argued against. Now, we go back to a narration of Umar ibn Abi Salama, radiyallahu anhu, who was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's stepson, right? In Jami' al-Tirmidhi, Umar, he describes to us that he went to eat, and he was eating in the presence of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was picking his food from all over the dish. They used to eat together in one dish, and he was kind of picking out from wherever he wanted. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to him, "Ya ghulam, sammillah wa kul biyaminik wa kul mimma yalik." He said to me, young man, say Bismillah and eat with your right hand only, and eat with that which is closest to you. And eat with that which is closest to you. He says, وَلِلتِّرْمِذِي وَصَحَّحَهُ عَنْ عَائِشَةَ كَانَ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ يَأْكُلُ طَعَامًا فِي سِتَّةٍ مِّنْ أَصْحَابِهِ فجاء أعرابي فأكله بلقمتين فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أما إنه لو سمى لكفاكم. إيش يعني هذا الحديث؟ يعني كانوا يأكلون منهم 6 فجاء أعرابي ولهطها كلها في لقمتين فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أما إنه لو سمى الله لو قال بسم الله لكفاكم هذا الأكل لكن نزعت البركة لأن اسم الله لم يذكر على هذا الطعام. He says, and At-Tirmidhi rahimahullah has reported a narration and graded it authentic on the authority of Aisha, who states that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam was once eating with a group of his companions, 6 with 6 of his companions, a group of 6 from amongst his companions. And a Bedouin man came and made them 7. And he started eating with them, and he seemed to devour the dish in 2 quick swipes. 2, it could have been 3 or 5 or 10, but 2 meaning very quickly. He finished up the food. And the Prophet ﷺ commented on this incident and said, indeed, if he had merely said, Bismillah, then that food would have sufficed you all. It would have been sufficient. Why? Because by him intentionally not saying Bismillah, the barakah that Allah would generally place on the food was revoked. However, had he said Bismillah and began with Bismillah, the barakah would have been placed into that food. We live in a time of superficiality where everything that matters is size and number, right? It's got to be the biggest. If it's not super big, it's not important. And it's got to be the most. And if it's not the most, it's not important, right? This is how we judge our environment now. It's all about the most numbers and the biggest crowds and, right? How many followers I have. Don't worry about the quality of those numbers. All we worry about is the number. However, the same thing goes with issues of wealth, money. We only look at how much I have and how much I make, but how much of it is actually blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is what is important. What makes wealth and food and health and so forth something that is worthy and worthwhile and qualitative is that Allah blesses it. If Allah has not blessed it, it doesn't matter how much it is. Even if it appears to be more, it's actually less. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala along these lines tells us, يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَى وَيُرْبِ الصَّدَقَاتِ. He says subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah does stunt. He does stunt riba, usury, and he increases charity. What does that mean? When a person takes interest, they've essentially made $1 into 2. To simplify it, they've essentially made $1 into 2. You would think that a person who takes riba is always winning, but really, he's always losing. Even if he has a higher number, the barakah in that money is not going to be there. And you can see that. I mean, there's people swimming in wealth, taken by way of riba, and it goes and comes as fast as, it goes as fast as it comes. There's no quality to it. Person can't really catch it, can't capture it, because there's no barakah in it. And the same thing goes with time. And so, the issue is not the number. The issue is what? The issue is whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed barakah in it or not. It's mentioned, this issue of barakah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions this in a narration in Sahih al-Bukhari. He says sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, al-ba'i'ani in bayyana wa sadaqa burika lahuma fi bay'ihima wa in kadhaba وَكَتَمَ مُحِقَتْ بَرَكَةُ بَيْعِهِمْ. He says, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that two people who come together to buy and sell, to have a transaction, if they are truthful and they are transparent about their purchase and about their sale, Allah will place barakah in it. But if they conceal and if they are untruthful, then the barakah, the blessing of that transaction will be stunted, will be taken, will be revoked. And so, let's say a person has a car, right? If I tell the buyer, let's say I have a car, and I tell the buyer, hey, this car has a problem with the transmission. What's going to happen to the price of that car? It's going to go down, right? But the Prophet ﷺ promises us that if you are transparent and honest, even though the price is less, you will receive more in way of blessing from Allah. That wealth will be qualitative. However, if I conceal that problem, the price of that vehicle goes up, right? And I will get more. It appears to be more, but really it is less. So the issue of barakah is very important. We have to seek quality, not necessarily quantity. Quantity is only important when it is qualitative. If it is lacking in quality, quantity will not necessarily amend that. So, this is an important point that Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah makes here. It's a point that is alluded to throughout the Quran and Sunnah. It's important that an individual understand that just because something appears to be more doesn't necessarily mean that it is. Just because something appears to be less doesn't necessarily mean that it is. And this is what we are taught in the Quran, that no minority is mentioned in the Quran except that it is praised. And no majority is mentioned in the Quran except that it is dispraised. This is not to say that a majority cannot be praiseworthy, but it is to say that quality is always more important than quantity. It's enough for tonight, inshallah. We'll continue next week. Bi-idhnillah. Allahu a'lam wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad.
الله أكبر.